June 5th, 1976. 6:47 a.m. Mark Reeves was 53 years old. Every morning he walked Chambers Road with his golden retriever, Biscuit. It was supposed to be just another Saturday. The Kentucky sun hadn't fully risen, the humidity pressed down heavy. Tobacco fields stretched out on either side of the road. The air smelled like earth and dew. But something was wrong. Mark felt it before he understood it. That feeling when the hair on the back of your neck stands up. When your stomach drops. When every instinct starts screaming, "Turn around, don't look, go home." Biscuit stopped walking. Biscuit was a good dog, loyal, obedient, loved his walks more than anything. But that morning, he planted all four paws in the gravel and refused to move. His ears went flat. A whimper escaped his throat. "What is it, boy?" Mark tugged the leash. "Come on now." Biscuit didn't budge. That's when Mark saw the drainage ditch. Something was in there. Something that shouldn't be. Mark's legs moved before his mind could catch up. Each step felt like it took an eternity. His heart pounded in his ears. There in that muddy water lay a young girl, brown hair fanned out around her head. Bell-bottom jeans with embroidered flowers. A peasant blouse torn and stained. Carol Sue Klaber, 16 years old. Mark Reeves fell to his knees right there on that country road and wept. He wept for the girl in the ditch. He wept for her parents who didn't know yet that their world was about to shatter. And somewhere in Walton, Kentucky, a killer sat down to breakfast like nothing had happened. Now, before I continue with this story, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. In the town of Walton, Kentucky, the kind of town where everybody knew everybody, where you didn't lock your doors at night because your neighbors were good people, church-going people. That's where Carol Sue Klaber sang. First Baptist Church wasn't just a building, it was the heart of the community. And when Carol sang, people stopped whatever they were doing and listened. When she sang Amazing Grace, grown men cried. It was like God himself stopped to listen, Pastor Raymond Mills said later. That girl had a genuine God-given gift. But Carol wasn't just a voice, she was a person. 16 years old with feathered hair the color of autumn leaves, a smile that could light up a room. She was a straight-A student at Walton Verona High, not because her parents pushed her, but because she genuinely loved learning. Her English teacher, Mrs. Patterson, kept every essay Carol ever wrote. Those weren't just school assignments, she said. They were windows into a soul that saw beauty everywhere. Carol organized car washes to raise money for cancer patients. She spent Saturday mornings visiting elderly shut-ins while her friends slept in. She always saw the best in people, even when she shouldn't have. Betty Klaber knew from the moment Carol took her first breath that this child was special. It was March 15th, 1960. Betty had been in labor for 14 hours. When that baby finally came, screaming and red-faced and absolutely perfect, Betty felt something shift. "She looked at me," Betty would say. Most babies' eyes are unfocused, but Carol looked right at me, right into my soul, like she was saying, "Don't worry, Mama, I chose you." Carol was the Klabers' third child. Her older brothers, Michael and Thomas, adored her from day one. They'd fight over who got to hold her, who got to make her laugh. And oh, how that baby laughed. Earl Klaber, a man who rarely showed emotion, would come home from long days working the farm, and his whole face would change the moment Carol smiled at him. As Carol grew, so did her gifts. She started singing before she could properly talk. By age 5, she was humming harmonies to hymns on the radio. By 8, the children's choir director at First Baptist pulled Betty aside. "Mrs. Klaber, that child has a voice sent straight from the angels. You need to nurture that." They did. Voice lessons every Thursday. choir practice every Wednesday night. But here's what made Carol different. She never let it go to her head. She never acted like she was better than anyone else. When old Mrs. Henderson's husband passed and she couldn't bring herself to leave the house, it was Carol who showed up every Saturday with cookies, singing all of Mr. Henderson's favorite hymns until Mrs. Henderson finally stopped crying. By the spring of 1976, Carol had her whole life planned out. Finish high school at the top of her class, get a scholarship to the University of Kentucky, maybe study education, and somewhere along the way make it to Nashville. She wanted to sing at the Grand Ole Opry, her best friend Darlene said. Not for fame, she just wanted to share what God gave her. Carol kept a diary, pink cover, little brass lock, her name written in careful handwriting on the first page. She wrote in it every night, recording her thoughts, her hopes, her crushes. But there was something else in that diary, too. Something that wouldn't make sense until 46 years later. A letter. W. Carol wrote about someone she called W. Someone older. Someone she shouldn't have been seeing. I know everyone would disapprove, she wrote on May 28, 1976. But W needs me. I think I can help him. I think I can save him. Carol Sue Klaber believed she could save everyone. That summer, Carol was saving for her dream. A 1976 Ford Pinto, burnt orange. She'd been babysitting since she was 13, squirreling away every dollar in a mason jar under her bed. $87 more, she told Darlene the week before she died. $87 and I'm free. She never got to drive it. June 4th, 1976, Friday morning. Carol woke to the smell of her mama's biscuits. The same biscuits Betty had made every Friday morning since Carol was old enough to remember. The sun was already warm, but Carol didn't mind. She had too much to look forward to. Tonight was the summer choir recital at First Baptist Church. She'd been practicing Amazing Grace for 6 weeks. Solo, just her voice and the old church piano. She was nervous, excited, alive. She came downstairs that morning wearing her favorite bell-bottoms, Betty testified later. The ones with the little flowers she'd embroidered herself, and a peasant blouse she'd borrowed from her cousin. She looked like an angel. They ate breakfast together. Carol helped wash the dishes. She kissed her daddy on the cheek before he left for the fields. I love you, Daddy. Love you too, baby girl. The last words they ever exchanged. By 3:30 p.m., the final bell at Walton Verona High School rang out. Carol burst through the doors with Darlene, both giggling about something only 16-year-old girls would find funny. Let's go to Dairy Queen, Darlene said. I'm dying for a blizzard. Split one with me? I'm trying to save every penny for that Pinto. Girl, you in that car. They drove down Route 25 with the windows rolled down and the radio blasting. Three Dog Night, Elton John. The kind of music that makes you feel immortal. At Dairy Queen, they squeezed into a red vinyl booth and shared that blizzard. They talked about boys and dreams and everything that mattered when you were 16. Carol talked about Nashville, about the Grand Ole Opry, about how nervous she was for tonight. You're gonna be amazing, Darlene said. You're always amazing. As Darlene pulled out of the parking lot, Carol suddenly said, Actually, can you drop me at the Texaco station on Main Street instead? Darlene frowned. The Texaco? Why? Carol just smiled, that mysterious little smile. I gotta meet somebody. Who? Nobody you know. Darlene assumed it was a boy. Some summer romance Carol wasn't ready to share yet. Fine, be mysterious, but you better tell me everything later. I will, Carol promised, climbing out. I'll call you tonight after the recital. She never made that call. Darlene watched her best friend walk toward the gas station, bell-bottoms swaying, feathered hair catching the afternoon light. That was the last time she ever saw Carol Sue Klaber alive. "I think about it every single day," Darlene said in 2015. "Every single day I wonder, what if I'd asked more questions? What if I'd made her tell me who she was meeting?" At 5:30 p.m., Carol arrived home in time to help her mama set the table. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans from the garden, a celebration meal for Carol's big night. Earl came in from the fields. Michael and Thomas were there too, ready to tease their baby sister about her solo. "You gonna hit that high note?" Thomas asked, grinning. "Or you gonna sound like a cat getting its tail stepped on?" "Thomas Earl Klaber," Betty scolded, but she was smiling. Carol just laughed. "You wait and see. I've been practicing that note for weeks. It's going to be perfect." The sanctuary was packed. 300 people crowded into pews designed for 200. The air conditioning had given up 2 days before. The humidity pressed down heavy. But nobody left. Nobody even complained. Because Carol Sue Klaber was singing solo. She took her place in the choir loft, third from the left front row. Her face was pale with nerves. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the hymnal. Betty sat in the fifth pew, her heart so full of pride she thought it might burst. Earl sat beside her, stoic as always, but Betty could see the shine in his eyes. Pastor Raymond Mills gave the introduction. The pianist played the opening notes. And then Carol started to sing. "Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound." The congregation went silent, not the polite silence of people waiting for a song to end. The sacred silence of people experiencing something holy. "That saved a wretch like me." Carol's voice rose through that humid sanctuary like a prayer-made sound. It filled every corner. It wrapped around the congregation like a warm embrace from heaven itself. "I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see." When the last note faded into silence, nobody moved. Then the applause started, thunderous, standing ovation, people crying and clapping and praising Jesus all at the same time. Carol had no way of knowing that in less than 4 hours, she would be dead. The recital ended by 9:15 p.m. Families lingered in the parking lot, congratulating the choir members, making plans for Sunday dinner. Carol hugged her mama tight. "You were wonderful, baby," Betty whispered. "Thanks, Mama." Earl clapped his daughter on the shoulder. "Proud of you, baby girl." "Thanks, Daddy." Then came the moment that would haunt Betty and Earl Klaber for the rest of their lives. "Y'all go on home," Carol said. "I'm gonna catch a ride with Tammy's mom. We might get ice cream after." Betty hesitated. Something felt off. She'd later describe it as a cold feeling in her stomach, but she pushed it aside. "Don't be too late." "I won't. Love you." "Love you too, baby." Carol waved as her parents drove away. The tail lights of their Buick disappeared into the Kentucky night. That was the last time Betty and Earl Klaber ever saw their daughter alive. Here's what investigators discovered later. There was no Tammy in that choir. No Tammy in the youth group, no Tammy at First Baptist Church at all. Carol Sue Klaber lied to her parents. The girl who never lied. The girl who was honest to a fault. The girl who confessed to stealing a cookie when she was 5 because the guilt ate her alive. That girl looked her mama in the eye and told a lie. Why? What was she hiding? Who was she protecting? By 10:18 p.m., the Texaco station on Main Street was quiet. Most of Walton had gone to bed. Only a few cars passed by, their headlights cutting brief paths through the darkness. Carol Sue Klaber stood at the payphone outside the station. She was still wearing her choir clothes, those beloved bell-bottoms. The peasant blouse slightly wilted from the humidity. Her feathered hair had lost some of its bounce. But her eyes were bright, alert, waiting. Dale Perkins, the night manager, noticed her through the window as he counted the register. Pretty girl. Looked familiar. Maybe he'd seen her at church. He thought about asking if she needed help, but she seemed fine, just making a phone call, probably waiting for her ride. He went back to counting receipts. The phone call lasted 2 minutes and 14 seconds. Long enough to say I'm at the Texaco and come pick me up and maybe I love you. Who was on the other end of that line? Investigators traced the number to a disconnected line. A boarding house on the edge of town that had been demolished 6 months earlier. A dead end. But someone came. Dale Perkins looked up when he heard the truck pull in by 10:30 p.m. Blue Chevrolet pickup, work truck. The kind farmers and construction workers drove all over Boone County. Nothing unusual about it. He saw a young woman, brown hair, bell-bottoms, climb into the passenger side. The truck pulled away. Dale went back to his receipts. He didn't see her face clearly. He didn't see the driver at all. He didn't think anything of it. Why would he? Pretty girl gets picked up by someone she obviously knows, climbs willingly into the truck, drives away. Happens 100 times a day in small towns across America. Dale Perkins had no way of knowing he'd just witnessed the beginning of a murder. And then, silence. For the next 8 hours, Carol Sue Klaber vanished from the face of the earth. No witnesses saw the blue truck after it left the Texaco station. No one heard screams or calls for help. No one saw anything unusual on the dark country roads of Boone County. It was as if Carol had been swallowed by the night itself. What happened in those 8 hours? We know now, thanks to a confession that came 46 years too late, but back then it was the question that tormented everyone. Did she know her killer? Yes. Did she trust him? Completely. Did she have any idea when she climbed into that blue Chevrolet pickup that she would never climb out again? No. Carol Sue Klaber believed in the goodness of people. She believed that everyone deserved a chance. She believed that with enough love and prayer, even the most troubled soul could be saved. She was wrong. Carol got into that truck with someone she thought she knew, someone who seemed safe, someone who was family, on June 5, 1976, 6:47 a.m. Mark Reeves' call brought the Boone County Sheriff's Department to Chambers Road within minutes. Sheriff Howard "Howie" Benton had been in law enforcement for 32 years. He'd seen car accidents, bar fights, the occasional domestic dispute that turned deadly. He'd never seen anything like this. It was rage, he told reporters later, pure, uncontrolled rage. Whoever did this wasn't just trying to kill that girl, he was trying to destroy her. The cause of death: blunt force trauma to the skull, combined with manual strangulation. Someone had beaten Carol Sue Klaber with rocks from the creek bed. Again and again and again until her beautiful face was unrecognizable. And then, when she was already dying, maybe already dead, he strangled her. Wrapped his hands around her throat and squeezed until there was no breath left. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was personal. At the crime scene, Detective Harold Mumford, lead investigator, studied the scene with meticulous care. There, in the soft mud near the drainage ditch, boot prints, size 11, steel-toed work boots. Could be anyone, Deputy Wilson muttered. Half the men in Boone County wear boots like that. 15 feet from Carol's body, partially submerged in the murky drainage water, something caught the sunlight. Orange plastic. Small. Ordinary. A Bic lighter. Carol's purse, the little brown leather bag she'd carried to the choir recital, was gone. Her wallet, gone. The delicate gold necklace her grandmother had given her for her 16th birthday. Gone. The cash she'd been saving for that burnt orange Pinto. Gone. A robbery, then? But wait. Detective Mumford's eyes narrowed as he studied Carol's left hand. Her class ring. Sterling silver. Garnet stone. The Walton Verona High School crest etched into the band. worth more than the wallet, the necklace, and the cash combined, still on her finger, untouched. If this was a robbery, then why leave the most valuable item? This is 1976. DNA testing doesn't exist yet. The best forensic scientists could determine was blood type, type O positive. The most common blood type in America, shared by 37% of the population. The scene was, in Detective Mumford's words, unnervingly clean. Whoever killed Carol Sue Klaber knew what he was doing. He was careful, methodical. He left behind a nearly perfect crime scene. Nearly perfect. Because he made one mistake. One tiny, seemingly insignificant mistake that would take 46 years and a revolution in forensic science to expose. He left behind his DNA. Not much. Just enough. Preserved in that evidence locker, waiting for technology that hadn't been invented yet. Waiting to speak his name, Betty Klaber knew something was wrong the moment she saw the sheriff's car pull into her driveway. She'd been worried since dawn, when Carol's bed was still made, still empty. She'd called Darlene's house, no answer. Called the church, no one had seen Carol since the recital. Earl had gone out looking, driving the back roads in his pickup truck, telling himself she'd just fallen asleep at a friend's house. But when Sheriff Benton stepped out of that car, when Betty saw the look on his face, that terrible, awful, unmistakable look, she knew. She knew before he said a word. "No," she whispered. "No, no, 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 no." Her legs gave out. She crumpled right there on the front porch, and Sheriff Benton caught her before she hit the ground. "Mrs. Klaber, I'm so sorry. Not my baby, not my baby." Her screams echoed across the tobacco fields. Her sons came running. Earl's truck came tearing up the driveway, gravel spraying everywhere. And in that moment, time split in two. There was before, and there was after. The Klaber family would never be whole again. Sheriff Benton called a press conference outside the Boone County Courthouse. The June heat was brutal, but that didn't stop the crowd from gathering. Reporters from Cincinnati and Louisville, concerned citizens from Walton and surrounding towns, grieving members of First Baptist Church. "We are pursuing all leads," Sheriff Benton announced, sweat rolling down his temples. "We have reason to believe this crime was committed by someone local, someone who knew Carol. We are asking anyone with information to come forward immediately." Then came the warning that would change everything. "Until we apprehend this individual, I am advising all residents of Boone County to lock your doors. Keep your children close. Do not let your daughters travel alone, especially at night." In Walton, Kentucky, nobody locked their doors. That's what made it Walton. That's what made it home. But after Carol Sue Klaber, everything changed. 200 people were questioned in the first 7 days. Every man in Walton who wore size 11 boots. Every farmer and construction worker. Every male member of First Baptist Church. Every young man Carol had ever spoken to, smiled at, or mentioned in her diary. The blue Chevrolet pickup became an obsession. They identified every blue Chevy registered in Boone County, 47 trucks in total. They interviewed every owner. Nothing. The truck that picked up Carol from the Texaco station might as well have been a phantom. But suspects began piling up, and suspect number 1 was Roy Dean Harmon, Carol's uncle by marriage. 42 years old, thick-necked and mean-eyed, the kind of man who got meaner with every drink. Multiple witnesses reported that Roy Dean had made inappropriate comments about Carol at family gatherings. Called her pretty little thing. Told her she was filling out real nice. The summer before, at a 4th of July barbecue, Roy Dean had cornered Carol near the barn and said something that made her cry. Earl Klaber found out and nearly broke Roy Dean's jaw. "Stay away from my daughter," Earl had warned, "or I'll kill you myself." Now Carol was dead, and Roy Dean Harmon had no alibi for the night of June 4th. "I was home," he told investigators, watching television, alone. His boot size, 11, his blood type, O positive. His truck, blue Chevrolet pickup, 1974 model. We had him, Detective Mumford recalled years later. We were absolutely certain we had him, everything fit. They brought him in for questioning. 9 hours in that interrogation room, deputies hammering at him from every angle. Roy Dean denied everything. Then came the polygraph test. Roy Dean Harmon passed. The needle barely twitched. He's telling the truth, the examiner announced. He didn't kill that girl. Detective Mumford slammed his fist on the table. That's impossible. Roy Dean Harmon died in 1994. Liver failure. Whatever truth he carried went with him to the grave. In the summer of 1976, a group of traveling evangelists set up a tent revival on the outskirts of Walton. They called themselves the Brothers of the Burning Cross. Fire and brimstone preachers in black suits, sweating through sermons about sin and temptation and the wickedness of women who led godly men astray. Two of the preachers, both men in their 30s with no fixed address, were seen at Carol's choir recital, sitting in the back row, watching. I noticed them because they were strangers, Pastor Raymond Mills testified, and there was something about the way they looked at Carol while she sang, something hungry. By the time detectives tracked down the revival location, the Brothers of the Burning Cross were gone. Their tent, their trucks, their members vanished. A nationwide alert was issued. The FBI got involved, but no trace of the group was ever found. Suspect number 3, the mystery of W. Remember Jimmy Wheeler, the quarterback everyone thought Carol was sweet on? When detectives brought him in for questioning, the boy was terrified, shaking so hard he could barely sit still. But not because he was guilty. Jimmy Wheeler had a secret. He was gay. And in 1976 Kentucky, that wasn't just a secret, it was a survival mechanism. His flirtation with Carol was an act. A performance they'd both agreed to. She covered for him. He covered for her. Covered for what? She was seeing someone, Jimmy confessed, tears streaming down his face. Someone older, someone married. Someone she couldn't tell anyone about. The detectives leaned forward. Who? I don't know. She never told me his name. She just called him W. Said if anyone found out, it would destroy his family. W, a single letter. For 46 years it meant nothing, and then it meant everything. By 1978, the case went cold. All leads had been exhausted. Roy Dean Harmon cleared by polygraph. The traveling preachers vanished without a trace. The mysterious W, impossible to identify. The blue Chevrolet pickup, one of thousands, with no new evidence and no viable suspects, the murder of Carol Sue Klaber was officially classified as a cold case. The files were boxed up and stored in a basement. The investigators moved on to other cases. The reporters found other stories to tell. But for Betty and Earl Klaber, there was no moving on. There was only the waiting, and the wondering, and the unbearable weight of never knowing who killed their baby girl. 1977, 1 year later. The first anniversary of Carol's death fell on a Saturday, just like the day she was found. Betty Klaber woke at 5:30 in the morning before the sun came up, before Earl stirred in the bed beside her. She moved through the dark house like a ghost, making coffee she wouldn't drink. At 6:30, she got in her car. At 6:47, the exact moment Mark Reeves had found her daughter's body, Betty stood at the edge of that drainage ditch with a bouquet of lilacs in her trembling hands. Lilacs were Carol's favorite flower. "Hey, baby girl," Betty whispered to the empty air. "Mama's here." She placed the flowers at the small white cross she'd erected at the edge of the ditch. Homemade, painted by her own hands, Carol's name and dates carved into the wood. Then Betty sat down in the grass and talked to her daughter. She talked about the weather, about what was happening at church, about how Michael had started dating a nice girl, about how Thomas was thinking about joining the army. she apologized. "I'm sorry I let you go that night, baby. I'm sorry I didn't ask more questions." She made promises. "I'm not gonna stop. I'm never gonna stop. Whoever did this to you, I'm gonna find him." This ritual would continue for 46 years. Every June 4th, rain or shine, sickness or health, Betty Klaber never missed. While Betty grieved in the open, Earl Klaber retreated into himself. He stopped talking about Carol, stopped looking at photographs, stopped attending church, said he couldn't set foot in First Baptist without hearing his daughter's voice. But every night after supper, Earl did something that worried Betty more than anything else. He climbed into his pickup truck, shotgun racked in the rear window, and drove. The back roads of Boone County, Chambers Road, the Texaco station on Main Street, every dark corner and lonely stretch of highway where a killer might be hiding. He drove for hours, sometimes until 2 in the morning, sometimes until dawn. He was hunting, Carol's brother Michael explained years later. "We all knew. Daddy was hunting for the man who killed Carol. And if he ever found him..." Michael's voice trailed off. Everyone knew what Earl Klaber would do if he ever found his daughter's killer. Walton, Kentucky was never the same. Before Carol's murder, it was the kind of place where children played in the streets until dark, where neighbors borrowed sugar and never locked their doors. After, doors were locked, windows were bolted, children were kept close. The easy trust that had defined small-town life was shattered, replaced by something darker, something suspicious. The killer could be anyone. That uncertainty poisoned the community for decades. Friendships dissolved, families feuded. "It wasn't just Carol who died that night," one resident said. "It was our innocence, our trust. That monster killed our whole town." 14 years later, a television reporter named Linda Ashford decided to revisit the case. She tracked down Betty Klaber, now 62 years old, gray-haired and worn but still fierce, and asked if she'd do an interview. Betty agreed. The segment aired on a Tuesday evening in June. Betty sat in her living room, clutching Carol's diary to her chest, reading entries aloud in a voice that cracked with every word. May 15, 1976, only 3 more weeks until summer. I can't wait to spend every day at the lake with Darlene. May 28, 1976, I know everyone would disapprove, but W needs me. I think I can help him. June 3, 1976, tomorrow is the choir recital. I'm so nervous I could scream. Betty looked directly into the camera, tears streaming down her face. Someone knows what happened to my daughter. Someone out there has been carrying this secret for 14 years. I'm begging you, if you know anything, please come forward. Please give me peace. The segment generated hundreds of tips. None of them led anywhere. Earl Klaber's heart finally gave out 30 years later in 2006. He was 78 years old, still driving those back roads every night, still hunting for a phantom he would never find. They found him in his pickup truck parked on Chambers Road, staring at the white cross that marked where Carol was found. The shotgun was still racked behind his seat. His hands were still gripping the steering wheel. His eyes were still open, fixed on that cross like he was waiting for something. He died the way he lived after Carol, Michael said at the funeral. Looking for answers, fighting for justice, refusing to give up. Betty stood at her husband's grave, dry-eyed and determined. "You rest now, Earl," she whispered. "I'll keep fighting for both of us." By 2019, something was happening in cold case investigations across America, a technology called investigative genetic genealogy. You've probably heard of it. Maybe you've even submitted your own DNA to one of those ancestry websites, curious about where your people came from. Law enforcement discovered they could use those same databases to solve decades-old murders. They'd take DNA from a crime scene, upload it to public genealogy databases, and build family trees. working backward through generations, mapping marriages and births and deaths until the tree pointed to one name. The Kentucky State Police Cold Case Unit selected 15 unsolved homicides for genetic genealogy analysis. Carol Sue Klaber's case was number 7 on the list. Detective Rhonda Clark, a 12-year veteran who'd never worked the original investigation, was assigned as lead. She was 38 years old, mother of 2. The kind of detective who took cold cases personally because she couldn't stop thinking about the families still waiting for answers. The first thing she did was pull Carol's file from the basement. 3 boxes, thousands of pages, 46 years of dead ends and frustrated investigators, and 1 photograph. Carol Sue Klaber, 16 years old, smiling at the camera like she had her whole life ahead of her. I looked at that photo, Detective Clark recalled later, and I thought about my own daughter, same age, same bright eyes, same dreams about the future. She made a promise right then and there. Someone's been walking free for 46 years. Not anymore. The preserved evidence from Carol's crime scene was sent to Othram Labs in Texas, one of the leading genetic genealogy companies in the country. They worked with the rocks used to kill Carol, rocks that had been sitting in an evidence locker for nearly 5 decades. Most people would assume any DNA would be long gone, degraded, useless. But forensic science had come a long way since 1976. They got a profile, a complete genetic profile of Carol Sue Klaber's murderer. After 46 years, his DNA was ready to speak his name. Within weeks, Othram analysts identified several potential relatives. One stood out, a 72-year-old woman in Columbus, Ohio, who'd submitted her DNA to Ancestry.com to learn about her family heritage. She was a 4th cousin to the unknown killer. Genealogists began the painstaking process of building family trees, working backward through generations, mapping marriages and births and deaths. They identified a cluster of families in northern Kentucky with genetic markers matching the crime scene evidence. And in that cluster, one family name appeared again and again. Klaber. Wait, Klaber? The same last name as the victim? Detective Clark's heart nearly stopped when she saw it. She initially assumed it was coincidence. Klaber isn't a common name, but it's not unique either. But as the family tree expanded, the truth became clear. Carol Sue Klaber and her murderer shared a common ancestor. They were related, distantly, 5th cousins, twice removed, connected through a German immigrant who arrived in Kentucky back in 1847, but related nonetheless. The killer wasn't a stranger. He wasn't a transient preacher. He wasn't some drifter passing through. He was family. And his name, the name that had eluded investigators for 46 years, was about to be spoken aloud for the first time. William Eugene Klaber, 65 years old in 2022, born and raised in Walton, Kentucky. He'd lived there his entire life. William Eugene Klaber was there when Carol was murdered. He was there when the investigation unfolded. He was there when her parents wept at her grave. He was there when the case went cold. For 46 years, William Eugene Klaber walked the same streets as the family he'd destroyed, attended the same community events, sat in the same church pews. He watched Betty place lilacs at that cross every year. He watched Earl drive those back roads with his shotgun. He watched and he said nothing. But the walls were closing in. William Eugene Klaber just didn't know it yet. Detective Rhonda Clark faced a critical decision. She had genetic evidence pointing to William Eugene Klaber. The family tree was solid, the science was sound, everything lined up. But she needed one more thing. A direct DNA comparison. She needed William Eugene Klaber's actual DNA to confirm the match. Without it, any defense attorney would tear the case apart. Circumstantial, they'd say. Could be any number of relatives. Detective Clark needed certainty. She needed proof that would stand up in court and put this monster away forever. But here's the problem. She couldn't just walk up to William Eugene Klaber and ask for a DNA sample. If he refused, and he had every legal right to refuse, he'd know they were onto him. He might run, might destroy evidence, might hide behind legal technicalities until he died of old age, free and unpunished, just like he'd been for 46 years. Detective Clark wasn't going to let that happen. She needed his DNA without his knowledge. For 3 weeks, an undercover surveillance team monitored William Eugene Klaber's every move. They watched him shuffle to his mailbox every morning at 7:15, wearing the same faded bathrobe and slippers. They watched him climb into his truck at 8:30 and drive to the Main Street diner where he'd occupied the same booth for the better part of 30 years. They watched him order the same breakfast every single day. Black coffee, scrambled eggs, wheat toast. They watched him attend Sunday services at First Baptist Church of Walton, Carol's church, the church where she'd sung Amazing Grace on the last night of her life. William Eugene Klaber sat in those pews like he belonged there, like he had every right to be there, like he hadn't strangled the life out of a 16-year-old girl who'd sung those hymns with the voice of an angel. Detective Clark watched the surveillance footage and felt her blood boil. 46 years, she muttered. 46 years he sat in that church, right there with her family. But it was also going to be his downfall. Detective Clark arrived 15 minutes after William Eugene Klaber took his usual seat. She wore civilian clothes, nothing that would identify her as law enforcement. Just a middle-aged woman in jeans and a cardigan looking for a quiet place to have breakfast. She asked the hostess for a booth. "That one," she said, pointing to the booth directly behind Klaber. "If it's available." It was. She slid into the cracked vinyl seat, her back to the man she'd been hunting for weeks. Close enough to hear him chewing. Close enough to smell the coffee steam rising from his cup. Close enough to end this. She ordered coffee black like his and pretended to scroll through her phone, but her eyes were fixed on the mirror across the room. The mirror that gave her a perfect view of William Eugene Klaber's booth. He ate his eggs, he read his paper. He complained to the waitress about the coffee being lukewarm, ordinary, monstrous. At 9:17 a.m., William Eugene Klaber stood up, tossed a few crumpled bills on the table, and shuffled toward the door. He left his newspaper behind, and his coffee cup. Detective Clark waited until he was gone, until his truck pulled out of the parking lot and disappeared down Main Street. Then she stood up, casual as anything, and walked to his booth. The coffee cup sat there, still warm, a ring of brown liquid at the bottom. Klaber's lips had touched that rim. His DNA was on that cup. 46 years of justice sitting right there on a diner table. Detective Clark pulled an evidence bag from her purse, small enough to be inconspicuous, large enough to hold the cup. She picked it up carefully, using gloves she'd hidden in her pocket. Abandoned property, legally obtained, admissible in court. She placed the cup in the bag, sealed it, and walked out of the Main Street diner. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Got you! After all these years, I finally got you." April 15th, 2022. 4:47 p.m. The phone rang. Detective Clark grabbed it before the first ring finished. "Clark! Detective, this is Dr. Marcus Webb at the State Crime Lab. We have your results." Her hand tightened on the receiver. And? A pause. The kind of pause that could mean anything. Positive match. The DNA profile from the coffee cup is consistent with the DNA profile recovered from the 1976 crime scene. Statistical probability of error, 1 in 2.7 quintillion. Detective Clark closed her eyes. 1 in 2.7 quintillion. There was no doubt. There was no coincidence. There was no alternative explanation. William Eugene Klaber murdered Carol Sue Klaber in 1976, and after 46 years, they could finally prove it. October 27, 2022. 6:15 a.m. The sun hadn't risen yet over Walton, Kentucky. The tobacco fields were shrouded in mist. The birds were just starting to stir. Detective Clark and 4 Kentucky State Police officers surrounded William Eugene Klaber's single-story home on Route 14. She knocked on the door. Shuffling footsteps from inside, the creak of floorboards, the rattle of a chain being unlatched. The door opened. William Eugene Klaber stood there in his bathrobe. His eyes were rheumy with sleep. His white hair was disheveled. He looked like somebody's grandfather. He looked harmless. He looked like the last person in the world who could have beaten a 16-year-old girl to death with rocks and strangled her in a drainage ditch. But looks can be deceiving. William Eugene Klaber? Detective Clark kept her voice steady. Yeah? You're under arrest for the 1976 murder of Carol Sue Klaber. She watched his face, watched for surprise, shock, fear, any of the reactions an innocent person would have. Instead, she saw something else. Relief. His shoulders sagged, his eyes closed. A long, shuddering breath escaped his lungs. I wondered when you'd come, he said quietly. I've been wondering for 46 years. The interrogation room at the Kentucky State Police headquarters was small, gray, and unforgiving. A metal table, 2 chairs, a camera recording everything. William Eugene Klaber sat on one side. Detective Clark sat across from him. You have the right to an attorney, she said. Do you understand? I don't want an attorney. Mr. Klaber, I strongly advise. I said I don't want one. His voice was tired, hollow. I'm done hiding. I've been carrying this for 46 years and I'm ready to put it down. Detective Clark studied him for a long moment. Then tell me what happened. Tell me what happened to Carol Sue Klaber on the night of June 4th, 1976. And he did. William Eugene Klaber was 19 years old in the summer of 1976. He worked as a farmhand on a tobacco operation 3 miles from the Klaber family home. He was distant kin, connected through marriage, not blood, but family enough to know Carol. Family enough for her to trust him. On the night of June 4th, Klaber was driving home from a bar in his blue Chevrolet pickup truck. He'd been drinking, fighting with his girlfriend earlier that day. She'd called him worthless, told him he'd never amount to anything. He was drunk, he was angry. And then he passed the Texaco station, and he saw her, Carol Sue Klaber, standing at the payphone in her bell-bottoms and peasant blouse, 16 years old. Pretty, innocent, waiting for a ride that wasn't coming. He pulled in, rolled down the window. Hey, Carol, you need a lift? She smiled, that bright, trusting smile. Oh, hey, yeah, that'd be great. My ride fell through. She climbed into his truck without hesitation. Why wouldn't she? He was family, he was safe. She had no idea she'd just climbed into her own coffin. According to Klaber's confession, he intended to drive Carol home. Nothing more. But then she said something that made him angry. She looked at me, Klaber told Detective Clark, and she said I smelled like a brewery and I should be ashamed of myself. A pause. She was right, but I didn't want to hear it, not from her, not from some 16-year-old girl who had everything going for her while I had nothing. He pulled off onto Chambers Road, deserted, dark, no witnesses. Carol asked where they were going. He didn't answer. She started to get scared, reached for the door handle. He grabbed her arm. She fought, Klaber said, his voice barely a whisper. She fought hard, scratched my face, drew blood, and I snapped. He beat her with rocks from the creek bed, beat her until she stopped fighting. Then he wrapped his hands around her throat and squeezed until there was no life left. He dumped her body in the drainage ditch, burned his clothes, washed his truck, went to bed. The next morning, when the news broke that Carol Sue Klaber had been found murdered, William Eugene Klaber walked into the Main Street diner and ordered breakfast. Like nothing had happened. March 15th, 2023. What would have been Carol's 63rd birthday. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, people standing along the walls. More people gathered outside, watching on screens set up in the courthouse lobby. 47 years of waiting had come down to this moment. William Eugene Klaber sat at the defense table wearing an orange jumpsuit. His court-appointed attorney had tried to negotiate a plea deal, life with the possibility of parole after 25 years. The prosecution refused. This man stole 47 years of freedom, District Attorney Rebecca Morrison declared. Carol Sue Klaber doesn't get those years back, neither does he. The prosecution laid out their case with surgical precision. The DNA match, 1 in 2.7 quintillion. The blue Chevrolet pickup matching witness descriptions from 1976. The boot size, 11, matching the prints found at the scene. Klaber's own confession recorded and transcribed, every horrific detail preserved for the jury to hear. But the most powerful evidence wasn't scientific. It was human. Darlene, Carol's best friend, now 62 years old. She described the last time she saw Carol, at the Texaco station, waving goodbye, promising to call after the recital. She never called, Darlene said, her voice breaking. And for 47 years I've wondered if I could have saved her. Jimmy Wheeler, now 73, openly gay, no longer hiding who he was. She protected me, he testified. When everyone would have turned on me, Carol protected me, and I couldn't protect her. Members of First Baptist Church who remembered Carol's voice, teachers who remembered her essays, neighbors who remembered her smile. One by one, they painted a picture of the girl William Eugene Klaber had destroyed. On the fourth day of the trial, 82-year-old Betty Klaber took the stand. She walked slowly, aided by a cane, but her eyes were sharp, fierce, the eyes of a mother who'd waited 47 years for this moment. The prosecutor asked her to describe her daughter. Betty smiled, a sad, beautiful smile. Carol was sunshine, she said. She lit up every room she walked into, made everyone feel loved. She talked about the last night, the choir recital, the hug in the parking lot, the wave goodbye. I didn't know it was the last time, Betty said, her voice cracking. You never know when goodbye is really goodbye. She talked about the years of grief, the lilacs at the cross, the sleepless nights, the endless wondering. For 47 years, I've lived with a hole in my heart where my daughter used to be. Her eyes found William Eugene Klaber across the courtroom. You took all of that from her, from me, from everyone who loved her. She lifted her chin. But here's what you couldn't take. You couldn't take her memory. You couldn't take the love we have for her. And you couldn't escape justice forever. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and 17 minutes. When they filed back into the courtroom, every eye was fixed on the foreperson, a 68-year-old grandmother named Patricia Morrison who'd wept during Betty's testimony. Has the jury reached a verdict? The judge asked. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of murder in the first degree, how do you find? A pause, the longest pause of Betty Klaber's life. Guilty. The courtroom erupted, cheers, tears, applause. Decades of grief and frustration pouring out in a flood of emotion. Betty Klaber clutched her son's hands and wept, not tears of sorrow this time, but tears of relief. Finally, after 47 years, finally. At his sentencing hearing the following month, William Eugene Klaber was given the opportunity to address the court. He stood at the podium and rambled about his difficult childhood, his struggles with alcohol, the girlfriend who'd called him worthless. He never once apologized. He never once acknowledged the life he'd stolen. He never once looked at Betty Klaber or her sons. When he finally finished, the judge, the Honorable Thomas Reynolds, spoke. "Mr. Klaber, I've been on the bench for 32 years. I've seen a lot of evil, but I've never seen anything quite like this. You didn't just kill Carol Sue Klaber, you tortured her family for nearly 5 decades. You sat in their church. You walked their streets. You watched them suffer, and you said nothing. There is no sentence I can impose that will give Carol back her life. But I can make sure you never walk free again. William Eugene Klaber, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." Klaber's face went pale. As they led him away in handcuffs, William Eugene Klaber finally looked at Betty Klaber. And Betty, 82 years old, frail, exhausted but triumphant, looked right back. "Carol says hello," she said. After the sentencing, Betty asked to be driven to Chambers Road. One last time, she carried a small urn, Carol's ashes, which she'd kept on her nightstand for 47 years waiting for this moment, and a bouquet of fresh lilacs. Her sons helped her to the edge of the drainage ditch, to the white cross that had weathered decades of Kentucky seasons. Betty knelt in the grass just like she had every June 4th for 47 years. But this time was different. This time she had an answer. This time she had justice. She scattered her daughter's ashes across the field, letting them catch the wind, letting them drift over the tobacco farms and the rolling hills and the little town that had never stopped loving Carol Sue Klaber. Then she pulled out a small audio player, pressed play, and Carol's voice filled the air one final time. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see." Betty closed her eyes, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Sing free, baby," she whispered. "You're finally free. Before you go, I need to tell you about another case, another family destroyed, another person who was supposed to protect but became the predator instead. Sarah Mitchell, a 35-year-old single mother of 5 children who vanished after leaving work one July evening in 2015. Her children woke up the next morning to find their mother gone. For 8 years, the small town of Willowbrook, Kentucky searched for answers. The ex-boyfriend became the prime suspect. The community was torn apart. Fear spread like wildfire. And when the truth finally came out, when DNA evidence revealed who really killed Sarah, it exposed a betrayal so shocking, so unthinkable that it shattered everything that town believed about safety and trust, because the killer wasn't a stranger. Click the video on your screen right now to see how one chance encounter led to a mother's murder, and how DNA evidence finally exposed a devastating betrayal that no one saw coming. But I'm warning you. This case involves police corruption, family secrets, and a killer who used his position to get away with murder for nearly a decade. If you can't handle the truth about how monsters hide behind badges and smiles, don't click.